Our final case study is the eco-class tanker American Liberty that got underway from Marathon Garyville on the Mississippi River back in 2019 with 2 tugs on High River. Well, according to the captain, he estimated the current at 4 to 5. The pilot estimated it at about 5 to 6 knots. This federal pilot, still in his probationary period, after just a year and 10 months on the job, was solo and had never undocked on High River from Marathon before. Doesn't use a PPU, carries a cell phone with the app Mr. Tiz on it, which is primarily used for traffic management. There was an MPIX. Everything was working fine. We're going to take a look at diagrams and VDR transcripts from the NTSB. We're going to look at a couple of ECDIS screenshots and also a screenshot from the Mr. Tiz app. This was a 35-minute train wreck. We need to spend some time reading some clips from the NTS brief as well as the VDR transcript. So in the post-accident interview, the pilot said that his idea for undocking was getting the ship about 125 feet off the dock and turning around about a port. He didn't share this with the captain during the MPIX. The NTSB's schematic of the sequence. They let go lines at around 2028, and by 2034 and 2035, we'll see how this really degraded quickly. There were 4 elisions. There were 4 injuries to people on board other ships, 1 with a skull fracture. Total damages exceeded $40 million. Got from the Mr. Tiz. So the river pilots use a variety of PPUs or not. Some just use the cell phone. Some have Mr. Tiz as a proper PPU with a tablet and a rate of turn generator plugged into the AIS. Other groups use a variety of PPU packages. This pilot was eyeballing everything. We're going to look at the VDR transcript shortly and spend some time reading it. It's important to see how the MPIX flows and the several minutes of undocking and getting to this point here where the stern's about 125 feet off, broadside to the current. And you can see the dimensions there of the river. So that contour line equates to about 60 feet. Across the river, you see the radar return from barge fleets. The ship's vector is following that current right into the bend. This is a 203509. Now we're going to come back to that moment in the VDR transcript. Two tugs, one Z drive made fast on the port bow, aft tug not fast. So in their MPIX, they discussed tugs, speed on the river, traffic, line handlers. So look at the engine orders here. And we need to focus on pilot saying, bring her up to slow ahead whenever you can. Yeah, we're probably going to need a little while, especially with the current. Now there was a moment here of levity on the bridge. There was some laughter just before this order of bring it up to slow whenever you can. And we'll see how 2 minutes later, this pilot changes his mind and says, stop engine. We're going to look at the parametric data that the NTSB provides, synchronized with the VDR transcript, the engine orders, and the response of the RPM, rudder use, speed over ground. "2038, pilot, I can't keep going." The pilot had already told that tug, get back here and push full with some profanity. So his emotional level is rising here. We see those hashtags, the pound signs. There's cursing. Again, the pilot says stop engine. Then he says full astern. 2040 at the bottom here. Full ahead, hard left. Don't listen to the pilots. Wow. We're going to go back to that diagram to see this ship careen off of multiple docks and ships, eventually landing onto a barge fleet and the final dock 35 minutes later. So by this time, VTS has been called, tug assistance requested by the pilot, anchor dropped. The captain ordered the engine room to evacuate, thinking that they were going to breach the hull below the waterline as they hit the ships. All right. Think back to the MPIX. It was standard. So when this pilot gave that first ahead bell after all lines were on board, it was dead slow ahead. They were coming off the dock. He said, stop. He and the captain walked into the wheelhouse. It was 2035. He gave a dead slow ahead order, followed right after with that, come up to slow ahead whenever you can. There was some laughter, and then within 2 minutes, it was in extremis. Here we have the pilot saying, yeah, I didn't look at any of the dials. That pilot stood at the front window, never walked around, never looked at the ship's instruments, didn't really get support from the bridge team. They were eyeballing it, and they quickly realized that their RPMs were not responding. Now, what about this language issue? It's more polite to ask for speed changes, and that's the way I was trained, said this pilot. Remember that handshake slide before about the soft skills, diplomacy, and demeanor? This pilot gave an order that didn't mesh with our 7 C's of communications guidelines or with the IMO's standard marine communication phrases. And that comes into play in the federal court case later on. So here we have the captain. It's going to take a little while, was his response to the pilot's order of slow whenever you can. He canceled the load limiter. So think about this situation here. Why did the master say it's going to take a little while? Well, you've got this 4 to 5 knot current pushing on that propeller. It's increasing the load. It's got to overcome that torque. And the pilot didn't think anything of it. Oh, it should come up quicker with the following current. Well, that's not the case. Here's that parametric data, just showing the engine and rudder. So the gold line is the engine order, and the black line is the actual RPM response. And from that first order, a dead slow ahead, it responds. And then there's the slow ahead order right here, half ahead, full ahead. And you can see how the RPMs slowly ramped up. Maybe that load limiter wasn't disengaged. And then you can see how the engine was stopped, it responded, and then right back to full ahead. And it only gets to slow ahead and then half ahead. And we're in that in extremis mode. The board concluded both the pilot and the master, with their poor BRM and poor communication. Now here's a case with a contributing factor: the decision to release the tugs before the undocking maneuver was completed. Yes, that's what the pilot did once he was hardly a beam's width off the dock, walked into the wheelhouse, gave that dead slow ahead and slow ahead order, and that was 2035. And just 2 minutes later, they were drifting onto that first berth where the ATB Lucia was laying, and they narrowly missed it, and one of their tugs was bailing out at that point. We can sit here and look at the choice of, well, should the pilot have moved that ship out another half a ship length? There was plenty of room across the river. Would that ship have kited across the river, sort of like that Shandong Fuen did in that previous case? So when it comes to probable causes and contributing factors, the contributing factor doesn't have any effect on the probable cause. Without it, this incident still would have happened. Again, litigation. So Archer Daniel Midland, terminal owner, sues American Liberty. Here's the judge's conclusions in 2021. Let's review these. So think back to that VDR transcript. We saw the captain countermanding the pilot and then blurting out, "Don't listen to the pilot." They continued to give orders in opposition. Oh, but it was never the intention of the captain to take over the con. Clarity was required from the pilot about that initial order whenever you can. And here, the judge doesn't like this communication breakdown. And here the judge goes right after shoreside management. There's that CFR. The pilot shall be informed of any abnormalities and peculiarities. This judge thinks that the crew and the captain did not inform the pilot. And if he was, he might have acted differently. He might have ordered slow ahead earlier, or not released the tug when he did. Here's the judge letting the pilot off the hook. He says, the pilot's actions, though inadequate, were informed by the crew's failure. So this pilot was not informed. So ask yourself, do you have the duty to inquire? This goes back to our NPIX. We're going to look at some questions and dialogue here shortly. Rise. Verdict, 100% negligence on the part of Crowley. Right there, last sentence. Inadequate master pilot checklist and pilot card. Now, let's back up here. In this investigation, not only was the captain, the mate on duty, the pilot, and a few other crew members interviewed, the president of the federal pilot group was also interviewed. his comment about PPUs, well, they're kind of a redundancy, if not a distraction. Whereas the master of the ship said that pilot should have been using one. What do you all think about that? Can we cite a single point failure in this whole episode? Did he let go of the tugs early, regardless of the load limitation or the propeller torque overcoming that 4 to 5 knot current? Did he simply over-rotate? One of the interesting comments the pilot noted in his interview, he stated, well, there's an eddy at this dock, so I wanted to keep the stern close and let that current out there swing the bow around. Doesn't seem like that happened, did it? So here's a good spot to talk about bridge teams and nationalities and atmosphere on the bridge of a ship. What do you experience on foreign flag ships versus American ships? Their temperament, their demeanor. Let's go now to our final review. Simple question here. Did each of these 4 pilots use their resources? Did they manage them properly? Were they aware? Were they fit? Were they oriented? Were their decisions and actions proper? Notice how the pilot on the Shandong Fuen was forced to alter his undocking due to that barge aft. He'd done this maneuver multiple times. But did he do it before with a tug on the inside or the starboard bow? That's when he shifted that port side tug to that starboard bow. Interesting to note how when the 3 tug captains in that particular incident were interviewed, they all said the same thing, that it's unusual to see any tug be shifted to the inside on high river stage. All the tugs are on the port side. It's minimum 3 tugs, sometimes 4. The Genesis River pilot, running at sea speed, on the bay, on a loaded ship, even keel. One note about the NTSB, sometimes they include recommendations in their reports. Here, they recommended the trim on these loaded ships be by the stern for the transit, and like we said, that's what the Houston pilots now ask for. And this last case study, the American Liberty. Did he use all of his resources? Maybe kind of old school and just looking out the window and not at any other tools for confirmation. So the pilot on the Norwegian Epic, having never seen this ship or captain before, decided we need 3 tugs. Did he assess the risk properly? Walk a mile in his shoes in that situation. Now, in all 4 of these cases, the NTSB doesn't specify use of PPU, and they really didn't comment on tug use or alternative tug use, except in the American Liberty case. So what a PPU might have been a good tool. Their carriage and use has become more customary, and you might find a shipmaster who's surprised at a pilot not using one. So we applied these fundamentals of a good piloting practice to these case studies. Staying fit, rested, alert, awareness of the cultures and of the language barriers you deal with, managing the operational risk, minimizing the distractions. There's so many of them on the bridge that you've learn to tune out? How about cell phone use? Do you or does your association have guidelines or a policy on their use? Do you respond to calls and texts from anyone? Is it navigation related? And is it reasonable to take photos while conning? I heard a story from a pilot commissioner in another state about an incident he was involved with. A pilot in his district who spent 70 minutes on a cell phone call during a 90-minute transit. Yes, there are pilots whose emotional outbursts have been recorded on VDR and even by VTS traffic. Ship's officers, too, are guilty of the same behavior. We're imperfect humans. There are triggers to possible deep-seated personality traits that can destroy one's composure. There's an old story about a senior pilot who wants to show a riding apprentice how to handle these captains. I guess he thought bullying was a resource. In these 4 case studies, we constantly focused on MPIX, good practices, communications. So, you considered your routines for an information exchange in our first video. Here are some questions that are variations on the same theme. Some are more specific than others. Can you think of anything else to add to this list? Pilots and masters both have a duty to inquire and to share and inform. Our focus here has been on the personal, your routines and best practices. A code, a standard. Before pilots can ever climb that ladder or that gangway, start that MPIX and take the con, they must take responsibility for their fitness and their attitude. And there's still a team of pilots protecting your port. You're all professionally curious and strive to excel at your job. Remember that when you board your next ship, it's your port you welcome them to, and it's their home you work in. No one wants to hear that shipmaster say, "Don't listen to the pilot." We want you to hear that shipmaster say, "I hope I see you on departure, pilot." Everyone, thank you very much. Please drop us a line anytime. Take care.